The rain poured heavily that evening, drenching the small town in a curtain of water. Inside a modest home, a young woman named Eliza sat silently by the window, watching the droplets streak down the glass. At 23, she carried the weight of responsibility that most women her age didn't. Her father had fallen sick months ago, her mother had passed away years earlier, and the family debts piled up like mountains. Each knock on the door was another creditor demanding money they didn't have. That was when her relatives made a decision for her, one she didn't ask for. Eliza would marry a man she had never met, a wealthy stranger from the city, in exchange for her family's freedom from debt. She wanted to refuse, wanted to scream and cry that her life was her own. But when she looked at her father, coughing weakly on the old bed, and at her little brother who needed school fees, she realized her voice didn't matter anymore. She was a daughter and a sister before anything else, and she had to save them. The wedding was arranged in haste. There was no music, no flowers, no joy. Eliza wore a plain white gown that looked beautiful to others but felt like chains to her. Her groom, Adrian, stood tall and emotionless at the altar. His eyes were sharp, his suit perfectly tailored, but his face carried no warmth. People whispered about him being cold, a man who only knew business and nothing about love. To Eliza, he was simply a stranger, a man with the power to erase her family's suffering, but also the man stealing her freedom. When the vows were exchanged, her voice trembled. She didn't love him, she didn't even know him. But she whispered the words anyway, because in that moment, she felt she had no choice. Their first days together were strange, silent, and filled with distance. Adrian had given her a place in his luxurious mansion, but it felt more like a gilded cage. Eliza would sit alone in the vast dining room, the sound of her fork against porcelain echoing painfully in the emptiness. He rarely spoke, and when he did, his words were cold and practical. She convinced herself he had married her out of convenience, perhaps to settle some business arrangement, just as she had done for her family. Yet, slowly, little cracks began to appear in his cold exterior. One evening, when Eliza accidentally cut her finger in the kitchen, Adrian rushed to her side immediately, grabbing her hand with surprising urgency. His voice, usually firm and commanding, softened as he pressed a cloth to her wound. "Be careful," he murmured, his eyes lingering on hers longer than she expected. It was a fleeting moment, but one that stirred something inside her heart. More moments followed. She discovered that Adrian worked tirelessly, often late into the night, not because he was ruthless, but because he carried the burden of running his father's failing company. He had grown up without affection, always pushed to succeed, never allowed to show weakness. His coldness was not cruelty, it was protection. One rainy night, Eliza found him sitting alone in his study, staring blankly at the fire. She hesitated, then walked in quietly and placed a cup of tea on his desk. He looked up in surprise, as if no one had ever cared enough to do something so small for him. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely audible. That was the first time she saw a different side of him, a man who longed for connection but didn't know how to ask for it. Days turned into weeks, and Eliza realized she was no longer just enduring the marriage, she was beginning to understand him. He started joining her at the dinner table, asking about her day, listening quietly when she spoke about her dreams. One night, he confessed he never wanted to marry either, but when he heard about her situation, he saw himself in her struggle and decided to step in. "I didn't save you out of pity," Adrian said, his eyes steady on hers. "I saved you because I needed saving too." Her heart raced at his words. For the first time, she didn't see him as a stranger, but as a man who had been as lonely and broken as she had been. Their relationship shifted slowly, built on fragile but growing trust. The real change happened when her father fell gravely ill again, and Adrian insisted on bringing the best doctors to their town. Eliza had tried to remain strong, but seeing her father cared for with dignity and respect brought tears to her eyes. She realized Adrian had done more for her family in weeks than she ever thought possible. Late that night, she whispered to him, "Thank you, for everything." Adrian took her hand, holding it tightly. "You don't have to thank me," he said softly. "You don't know how much you've given me too." For Eliza, those words shattered the last wall around her heart. She had gone into this marriage unwilling, frightened, and angry. But now she saw the truth. Sometimes life pushes people into situations they don't want, only to show them what they truly need. Months later, as she walked hand in hand with Adrian through the garden of their home, she realized she was no longer living in fear. The stranger she had been forced to marry had become her partner, her protector, and the man she had come to love. She remembered the day she said her vows, feeling trapped and broken. Now, she whispered them again silently in her heart, this time with love, for better or for worse, till death do us part. In the end, she wasn't grateful for the marriage arrangement forced upon her. She was grateful for the man it brought into her life, and the love she had never imagined finding.